I'm going to tell you what. I'm going to talk with an HR specialist, an HR attorney. He's going to be on at 4:51, and he's going to tell us how anonymous can you stay? And when do you feel like it's the right time to go to HR with that complaint? We'll talk to him at 4:51 here on The Voice of Maryland. Maybe you are in a similar situation at work. Maybe you're looking at this case and saying, I'm being grabbed at work, but I don't want to be dragged through the mud. I'll tell you if you've got power to stop that. That's at 4:51 on The Voice of Maryland. News Radio 600, KOGO.
Oh, wait. Was she a great big fat person?
We've already seen the witch hunt. We've already heard what people say and do when women come forward. We're going to protect every one of these women who does not want to come forward, and as much as we're going to fight for every woman who does.
That's what the lawyers say is the reason that women are staying anonymous with the claims against the mayor right now. Shauna is in San Diego on The Voice of Maryland, News Radio 600, KOGO. Shauna, have you dealt with this kind of stuff before?
Say that again?
I said, have you dealt with this before, with sexual harassment stuff before?
I sure have. It was my first job out of college, and I had to go on a required trip with my supervisor and out in the territory. And this was the day before cell phones, so I didn't really have a good way to protect myself and get help. But he pulled over the side of the road and put his hand on my leg and started to bend over and kiss me, and I was freaked out, and I regret not bringing things more forward. I went back to the office, and the president of the company sent me home, and I was young and stupid, and now I completely regret not coming forward. So I hope that the public rallies around these women and help them, give them courage to come forward and do something about it.
Shauna, why was it you didn't come forward?
I was young and stupid. I didn't know my rights and stuff like that at that time. I was 22 years old.
All right, Shauna, thank you for that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually talk about those. I've got Pasha with me, and Pasha is a friend of mine, and he's a business attorney, and Pasha knows all this stuff inside and out. Pasha, you hear a story like Shauna's got there, and what is the process if somebody feels like, there's sexual harassment? What is the process, especially in a small business where maybe there isn't a big HR department? How do they address that issue?
Yeah, Shauna's situation is not unique, especially with smaller businesses. And every company, whether formally or informally, should have some kind of policy on how to deal with sexual harassment complaints. And if you're in a good enough sized company, they're going to have an employee handbook which outlines this process. But either way, it's very important that if you are a victim, to talk to somebody. If it's your supervisor and that's who's harassing you, then you may have to go a level above. And if there is no level above, then you're going to have to talk to an attorney or some other official to get that taken care of properly.
In some of these different mom and pop businesses, you might only have 4 or 5 employees, and if it's the owner doing it, then you really don't have any other recourse except to go to an attorney and find out what your play is, right?
That's right, and that's the difficulty with a smaller a company. But, if you talk to an attorney, to a good attorney, they're not going to rush you to file a lawsuit. They're going to encourage you to go through a process to make sure that anything that can be done to prevent the situation from happening in the first place. And even if there is someone to complain to, an HR person or so forth, or a supervisor, they're going to be required to walk through those steps as well to investigate what happened, to remedy the situation as well.
So Pasha's joining me, and Pasha is an attorney from Top Floor Legal. He's a friend of mine, and I asked him about the different HR policies. Here, when it comes to this stuff with the mayor, the big fear here of the women is that they want to remain anonymous because they don't want to get dragged through the mud. Is there any way to file a complaint and still be able to maintain some anonymity so that it doesn't get out that you're the person that's filed a complaint?
Well, I understand they want to stay anonymous, but if they want some sort of justice, they have to go through due process. And of course, in our court systems, no due process goes well unless you're able to confront your accuser.
Right. And
this is the unfortunate situation of the victims. But how are you going to investigate it otherwise? How are you going to prove that this actually happened? And we don't want we don't want accusers to remain anonymous because we want to make sure that justice is done as well.
So when you talk about due process, and this is where it gets very confusing because an HR policy is not a statute. It's not a municipal code. It's just an HR policy. So where is the line between sexual harassment and how a company deals with it, with their internal investigations, and then when it enters the realm of legal issues? Where is that line? Because it seems very gray to me.
Well, an HR policy is the first step. And the reason an HR policy is there is to determine where liability ends. Is it the employer that's liable, or is it the actual person that harassed the individual? So my point is that if the employer follows their policy and they have an investigative procedure, then the employer is less likely to be liable unless it's a supervisor, and that's a different issue. But if it's just an individual that did out of the norm, and there was no indication of the employer that this person was a problem, and they followed the investigation and so forth, then the employer is going to be less likely to be liable, and that's in the court of law. And so the next step after you complain, after you do the investigation, then there may be a civil suit that's filed, and that's where due process comes into play.
All right, that's
so you're right.
Go ahead.
No, you're right. As far as HR policies go, you just have to make an investigation, and the veracity of that investigation depends upon a case-by-case basis.
Okay. All right. See, and this is where I think there are a number of us that are watching what's going on with Mayor Filner, and we're seeing that we've got a bunch of women who are trying to remain anonymous, but it does make it very difficult to investigate the validity of these claims, aside from what we assume as onlookers to be valid because of the support and the caliber of people they have coming out to support them. But it's very difficult for us to go definitively and make a decision as to whether or not we think Filner should step down, because we don't have that.
Well,
we don't know who the accusers are.
I'm not sure if it's appropriate to make a decision, and I think that's the mayor's position, is to wait for due process to occur before we make any decisions. And that's not going to happen, unfortunately, for us to make an opinion until a long time from now, until a lawsuit's filed, until we get a judgment from a jury to determine what the facts were.
Pasha, I think you're right, which is why I keep saying that this story, if we look at this story as a clock, we're only at about 4 o'clock. We still have a long way to go on this story.
Yeah.
So, Pasha from Top Floor Legal. Pasha, always a pleasure to have you on the show, man. It's really nice to talk to you.
Thanks, Merrill.
All right, bud. We'll talk to you later. So, what about liability? How much liability do we have? Is the city going to end up ponying up all the dough on this? Are we going to get sued? Is the city going to have to pay out in some sort of a settlement? We'll answer some of those questions. We may even give you some more questions to hash out. That's at 5:06.